In this episode of Shaping the Future, I'm speaking to the Vatican's head of ecology, Father Josh, who also happens to be coordinating the COVID-19 response within the Holy City. In May 2020, Pope Francis declared a year of Laudato Si, building on the work of his encyclical on climate change in order to inspire exponential change across all walks of life, including all forms of Christianity, other faiths, and like-minded people around the world. Through many advisors that make up the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, among other advisors, church leaders are informed on climate and ecological science from some of the world's most respected experts. Father Josh iterates the connection between nature, humanity and climate, while emphasizing that the poor who have not caused this crisis are often the worst impacted, and that a just response to climate change means putting their needs at the forefront of our actions. In this interview, Father Josh also reminds us that we must learn from the pandemic in order to reform our relationship with nature and live within planetary constraints. Thank you for listening to Shaping the Future. The next episode will feature the director of the World Resources Institute in Washington, Dan Lashoff, discussing how impactful President-elect Biden's climate plans will likely be. Please subscribe to Shaping the Future on any of the major podcast channels to stay up to date. Father Josh, can you start by giving us an overview of how the Pope's encyclical Laudato Si is being represented over the course of 2020 to 2021?
Yeah, delighted to join you for this program. Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si was a landmark document. It has really impacted the way we look at environmental problems. And I think the key is in the subtitle of the encyclical when he says, it's about caring for our common home. Allow me to pick up these two words. It's our common home. It's not just environment or something outside of us. It is probably the place for each of us. Home is the place dearest to us, most intimate, and Earth is our home. And so the danger of making this home uninhabitable for our human family, but also for the biotic community. It's a very stark possibility right now. The second word is caring. Caring is again something that we do in a family. We care for one another, and we always care most for the weakest. Like when a child falls sick, the entire family comes around that child. So Pope Francis is telling us caring is probably one of the most noble virtues that we humans have. That we can really take care of others. And that's what we are seeing also the current pandemic, the people who have been caring for us, and we realize they are the most precious part of humanity. It's not billionaires or, who are saving humanity right now are doctors and nurses and healthcare workers and people in the supermarkets or police. So I think the big impact of Laudato Si has been in this change of paradigm about Earth as our common home, and the need to care for this common home and care for one another.
Okay. I think there's a universal truth in there, the home, there is only one, and it doesn't matter who you are dependent on it, and we're codependent.
Yeah.
What you mentioned about the people who are leading the pandemic are the nurses and doctors, the people who do all the things we don't normally recognize, are taking a leadership role. And can you talk a bit about it, how you perceive these links between the pandemic and the wider global climate crisis?
Personally, I was feeling a bit sad that connection was not being perceived, as much as we would love to, because the pandemic is sending us a very clear message. The planet is not healthy. We cannot be healthy. And this is a zoonotic disease, as all of us know. It is, passed from wildlife to us because of human interference with ecosystems, with the degradation of wildlife and deforestation. And as a philosopher, also, I'm a bit concerned because unless we get to the real roots of the problem, what a doctor would do when you have cancer, he or she has to offer you a proper diagnosis. Otherwise, you're running fever and you take paracetamol and the fever could go, but then you haven't really solved the problem. So I think in the current pandemic, that aspect is not sufficiently highlighted. It is a warning from nature to us. It's sufficient to remember, last 30 years or so, we have had hundreds of zoonotic diseases. We have had SARS, MERS, Ebola, and now COVID-19. And, so these are very, very clear messages. And there is a connection. The second thing is the pandemic. This is another keyword of Laudato Si, that everything is connected. Now, that is also the Buddhist principle of Sattita Samutpada, Prachita Samutpada, that everything is connected. I mean, that's again universal. So the pandemic is also connected to biodiversity loss, but also to the climate crisis. We know that temperatures rise, malaria or infectious diseases can spread more easily. And just think of the locusts appearing in Africa and eating away precious agricultural output of poor communities in the fields. So everything is connected.
It's a really important point about this connection between nature, the pandemic, us as humans. We talk a lot about the climate, but the ecological crisis is equally existential in a way. And there's kind of a signal, especially in the developed world, how we respond to nature. And this idea that we are consumers, it's a time to reflect on our consuming roles and how we could be better custodians. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very, very valid point you're making, because again, going to the deeper roots of the crisis, I mean, we said the current pandemic, for example, is a zoonotic disease. It comes from the destruction of wildlife and deforestation. Now, why does deforestation take place? It is to satisfy our thirst for consumption. And I'm happy that you're seeing it from the perspective of the developed world, because we think of the Amazon. And it's not a deforestation, the Amazon. The article I was reading, that every 10 trees fell there, 7 or 8 end up in China. So we start blaming China. And China is reaching everywhere. But the same article was saying of these 7, 8 trees, 6 or 7 go to Europe or to the US in terms of products. So the key problem is consumption. There again, it is our role. As a philosopher, I would say, probably the problem begins with modernity, when with Descartes and Bacon, and we have this perception that Descartes' own words, that we are maîtres possesseurs de la nature, that we are masters and possessors, that we are the boss, which is not true. A small virus has shown us our right place in the natural world. That unless we are part of, I think the key word emerging today in our conversation is connection, interconnection. That unless we humbly be part of that web of life, we cannot survive. Because consumption is, you don't bother about the rest of the web of life. It's like, sometimes what children or adolescents can do, but adults cannot afford to do that. I mean, you need to think of the consequences. We are a common family. Another big problem with consumption is not that everyone is consuming in the same way. We have the ecological footprint analysis saying that those in the US or Australia consume something like 6 planets a year. So in 2 months, you consume a planet. And in Europe, we are around half of that. And we think the earth is still holding up because poor countries don't, so consumption is, especially for those living in the developed world, 2 aspects. One, to look into our own consumption, which is unethical, and then to realize that we are depriving our own kith and kin, our own brothers and sisters, of their due share of the planet's resources. It's for everyone, isn't it?
I think you've just touched on one of the most critical points of this. There's a great deal of political struggle in the world today, and how we live our lives in relation to equity is at the heart of it. Can you talk a little bit about how you see us possibly resolving these differences that are currently unreconcilable, it seems?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I would begin by being realistic, and that is, the sadness welling up in you, because you see that, it's true that when you look at human evolution from a long perspective, we were tribes, and then we created little small city-states, and then states, nations, and we had the United Nations. In Europe, there's the European Union. And so we thought, we were going the direction of, becoming more and more of a human family. Then you find all of a sudden, that we are never returning to the tribalism, my country, and not even my country, my region and my people. And then we are forgetting the essential truth that we are a common family. So that's the realistic look at the situation. But I'm also optimistic, because I think also the basic question is, we need to make people reflect on what is the ultimate purpose of our living on this beautiful planet. It's just to consume and then you disappear, or Or isn't life much richer? Isn't life much, it's a much bigger project, And so I think it's important to open a much bigger horizon. And surprisingly, it's what young people are teaching us. Like I've seen as a priest also, young people going to countries in Africa or Asia, they come back really changed. And also in the climate strikes, children are telling us Earth is for everyone. And one of the famous quotations is, "Don't use and throw." Like, Earth is our home, and so children are waking us up to these sort of uh, very these perspectives. Yes, so I think we are in a moment of a big paradigm shift, because people are realizing that we cannot go on like this. Earth is sending very clear messages, and who knows, pandemic is a very tragic thing, but then it has given us also time to reflect. And I'm reminded of the word crisis in Greek, which, as many of us know, crisis is not as negative as we make it in English or other European modern languages. Crisis is an opportunity in Greek. It is like things have got so bad, you're forced to stop and you think about another possibility, and that can be the moment to really turn around and set a new course. Our real hope is that this crisis will become an opportunity for a more sustainable, more fraternal, more inclusive, more caring world and humanity.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about opportunity, because we have, in a way, pressed pause.
Yeah.
Even though emissions are still going up. At the same time, we are now really seeing the tangible extreme climate impacts in terms of the melting Arctic, fires in Australia, California, the Amazon, Siberia, and it goes on. And quite often the most vulnerable people are in the front line of that. How does the church, an enormous community, how do you take these principles of Laudato Si and move them right through the church down to the community level?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And, Laudato Si has a beautiful expression. That's paragraph 49, when Pope Francis says, we need to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So the physical aspects of the ecology crisis and how it is, causing immense suffering, especially to the poor. And Laudato Si was signed by Pope Francis on the 24th of May, 2015. So 2020 was the fifth anniversary, is the fifth anniversary of the encyclical. And precisely on the 24th of May 2020, Pope Francis declared a Laudato Si year. And he said, I'm declaring this year because the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, these cries have got even louder, even more painful. He says, we need to return to Laudato Si. Now, what we are doing as churches, we are proposing lots of initiatives. And one very concrete thing we said is an opportunity we need to really change course. So we are proposing a people's movement from below. So we have identified 7 areas, beginning with families, then faith in a community, so parishes, dioceses or villages, cities, And third is educational institutions. Church runs hundreds of thousands of schools and universities. So educational institutions, schools and universities. Fourth is hospitals and healthcare centers. I think of, in Africa, for example, the number of clinics that the church runs. And the fifth is businesses. And we think economy is a very crucial segment of this, beginning with the businesses and farms. And sixth would be organizations. So all the rest come into that, like NGOs, communication centers, and foundations. We have put everyone together. And the seventh is religious orders. I don't know if you're familiar that in the church there are some very huge religious orders like the Jesuits, the Dominicans, or Salesians, who have in turn, hundreds of thousands of institutions. And so we're inviting all these 7 segments, beginning with families and ending with religious orders, to begin a 7-year journey to become totally sustainable. So we are not waiting for 2030 or 2050. We are saying at the end of the anniversary year, and we are very much working on these projects, begin a 7-year journey in which your family becomes entirely sustainable. Then we are provided what we call Laudato Si goals. So it's not just sustainability as the UN understands. We have put cry of the earth, cry of the poor, economy, lifestyles, education, spirituality, and community action, that we do everything as the community as together. So we are inviting people voluntarily to join a 7-year journey, and that's not the end. Our idea is that we grow exponentially. So at the end of the Laudato Si year, we hope to have, hopefully hundreds of thousands of businesses and universities and schools. And it's not just a dream. Things are moving. So they will begin their 7-year journey. In 2022, we hope to invite another group and hopefully double the number of the first group. So if we had 2,000 schools in 2021 beginning a 7-year journey, 2022 will be 4,000. The year after, another group will be 8,000, 16,000, 32,000, 64,000. So in a decade, what really moves us is that we need to create a critical mass. And when we were working on this project, some sociologists were telling us, critical mass is not a big number. They were telling us the Berlin Wall came down because 3.5% of Germans came together. And that's how slavery was abolished. That's what Nelson Mandela did. That's what Gandhi did. And we think Pope Francis is probably one of those charismatic leaders who can inspire a people's movement from below. So churches got huge plans, but just not for the church, because Laudato Si is addressed to all people of goodwill. So we hope to invite other churches, then also other religions, and all people of goodwill. And speaking too much, but I conclude with a small example. On the 4th of October, the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, 7 mayors in Venice region, 7 mayors, the political leaders, they came together and they said, we want to create a Laudato Si chapel and garden. And, and they created a Laudato Si garden of 12,000 hectares in the Delta of Po, where the River Po reaches the Adriatic Sea. And then we had a beautiful Laudato Si chapel designed by one of the best architects from Bologna, from Italy. And there were so many people, and then really surprises, political leaders came forward, but they were inspired by Laudato Si. So something is moving. I'm optimistic. Children are moving, groups are moving, even business. Month of November we will have the Economy of Francesco meeting in Assisi with 3,000 young economists. And Pope Francis said, I want economists who are less than 30 years old. He thinks young people can change. Of course, we will have, people like Amartya Sen or Yunus, they're all coming there. Kate Robert of Oxford, they're all going to be there, But then the majority are going to be young economists. We cannot leave things, just to the enthusiasm of young people or children. We need to, strategize the journey. And also, time is running out, as much better than me. We are talking in terms of 2030 as a crucial deadline for if you want to remain at 1.5 degrees centigrade. So, but then we think we can create a people's movement, and once we have the critical mass, things will change. So, but we need to work towards that transformation.
Certainly. And you mentioned something very important about the research that showed that something like 3.5% is the tipping point for where change can really happen. And I think with organizations like the church that do have reaches into education and society, it's a good step towards bowling through that 3.5%. And it's the kind of small core of activism with the support of the wider public that really creates that change. So let's really hope that this comes to pass. Thank you very much for taking the time. It's been great to talk to you.
Me too, Nick.